G'day everyone, and welcome to the second of the webinars, season update webinars that we'll be delivering through the TAS Farm Innovation Hub. This is a bit of a pilot for the next eight months to just find and refine how we go about these updates, and hopefully something that we can deliver on a more permanent basis. So I've flipped them around a bit compared to the last month. So what I want to do to start with is a bit of a irrigation winter start update. Now I know we've had a bit of run around the place, and so it pushes back our thinking about starting to irrigate, but it's something I want to touch on anyway. So when we do need to start, and there are some parts in the states that should be irrigating, so when we do need to start, we're ahead of the curve. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to talk about specific some theory to this week or this month to kind of prepare for us. So the first thing I want to talk about is autumn sowing crops or winter sowing crops. So with the autumn sowing crops, I'm talking about that perennial pastures, so things that have come through out of winter, or autumn sowing crops such as pasture seed, carrot seed crops, new clovers, things like that have had the chance to go through that winter period. So because they were planted before the soil moisture started to fill up, they've got an established root structure. And particularly, and I couldn't think of a better word, but particularly in the Goldilocks winter, so a winter that hasn't been too wet or too dry. So in a winter that's been rather dry, we get a restriction on root growth, and in a winter that's gone through a fairly wet period, waterlogging can have an impact on that root growth because there's not that much oxygen in the profile. So in this winter, I'll be calling it a Goldilocks winter. A lot of that winter refill has been utilised by the plant. So the thing there is we really want to make sure that we're understanding our winter refill point, the period of how long it's been that winter refill, and our pattern. They're really important for those crops and how they come out of that in terms of that water use uptake and how soon they happen and how vigorous they happen. And for those crops, the thing that really catches us unaware is we let the wet parts of our paddocks dictate when we start. Okay, so there's always got to, especially in Tassie, we've got variability, undulating topography. Those wet areas are going to sit wet, particularly in times like now where water will flow down and sit in those parts of the profile. Don't let that dictate when you start irrigating, because there'll be better parts of your paddock, your dry parts of your paddock, which you'll already be taking off, and you don't want to hold them back. So for those crops, ETO is a great use as a guide to match your water use. So I'm going to touch on that in a minute. So spring sowing crops, poppies, peas, those kind of crops which are going in the ground now, or in the northwest case, they're being held off because they're a bit wet. We want to use ETC as your guide. I'm just going to touch on those two in a second. So evapotranspiration. So ETO is what we call it. So this here is a graph from one of our weather stations that kind of shows what our ETO has been like in the last week. So the last 7 days, evapotranspiration of about 2.6, 2.5. So we're looking at about that, 15, 16 mils over the week. And of course, then you take off that rainfall. So if you've had 15 mils of rainfall, it's kind of matched what we're seeing as for ETO for those pastures or those autumn sowing crops. And this here just gives you a bit of an indication about how our ETO varies over the season. So right now we're entering that period there where our ETOs are around that 3.5 to 4 mils a day. So just touching on ETO, Swan Systems has a great little sign up you can do that sends you an email once a day that just gives you a table like this. You can select your region based off Silo's 5-kilometre gridded forecasting, and that can just give you a bit of an idea of where you're sitting as in front of your ETO. So in this case, in the next week, we're looking at that 18, 19 mils of evapotranspiration, but the forecasting that's going to be matched by rainfall. But that's that number there is fairly solid to go on, whereas that one there can be quite variable, as we all know. So ETO versus ETC. So ETO is your standard measure of crop water demand. And it's got a reference crop, which is essentially a pasture, so a 12-centimetre pasture, fully covering the ground in its maximum growing period, and that's got a crop factor of 1. So the things that drive ETO are solar radiation, air temperature, humidity, wind speed, and then we put a crop factor of 1 there to give our number. So that's fine, and that's good for crops that have come out of winter, like I said, that are established, ready to utilise that soil moisture that's fallen through the winter or that spring rainfall, and that have ground cover that matches that leaf area index of a 12 centimetre pasture. So ETC then is the actual water loss from a particular crop. So that's based on multiply, and that's based on that crop stage, the stage that the crop is at. So you might have a poppy crop that's sitting, that's sitting at about 2-3 centimeters high. That's going to have a crop factor of much less than 1. So if you're using ETO to irrigate there, you're going to be severely over irrigating your crop and causing damage. So that's where ETC comes into it. So we want to then take that crop factor and apply that to it. So what you can do there is, if you can work out your ETC, so your crop factor of that particular crop, then multiply that by your ETO. So if it's a crop factor of, say, 0.2, you would then multiply what your ETO is by 0.2, and that will pull it down more into the region of what you need to know. So this diagram just gives you a bit of an indication about what we're looking at. So down here, you might have a crop factor of at that 0.1, 0.2. And then, as your crop ramps up, you have a look. So this is something to have a chat to your agronomist about. They should have some understanding about your particular crop and how that changes over the growing season. But there's also some good resources there at the FAO website, so fao.org. This is one that I use quite a bit, and that when we do some plant modelling, crop modelling. So I can never find it by Googling, going through the FAO website. So I just Google FAO and I Google crop factors, and you've got a great repository of information there, but also some numbers there to let you know, give you a bit of an idea of where you're sitting. So that's one that's worth looking at. So we look at ETO and ETC, and I just want to then touch on quickly about how we can see that within a moisture graph. So this is a graph that I've pulled off from one of our crops that are out there at the moment, and the ETC can be visualized within a soil moisture probe by the diurnal stepping. So diurnal stepping is what we see, this stepping down here, what we see in this summed moisture graph. So this is showing we're in winter here, so we're sitting quite full, and we're slowly getting a little bit of uptake, which is happening in that top 10 centimeters. But as we can see, as we get now into further into period, our crop's grown, so we've got a greater leaf area, so our crop coefficient, or our ETC, has increased, and we can see that's matched by the steps. So we can just see the steps there, but as we go further into the season, we can see that our crops, we can actually see those diurnal steps a lot clearer, and those will then be, you can then tell, if there's a bit hotter, windier day, there will be a greater step. So that's that daily water use, and then we can see that within the graph. But also when we see it over time, what we then look at is the gradient. So all those steps accumulated give us a gradient to give us an indication of that crop water demand. So I just want, that was just quickly just touching on crop, that irrigation, where we want to look at and coming into, and there's some parts of the state that are a lot further ahead than the others, but I want to focus on those specifically when I get to them. So now I'm just going to go around through, do the seasonal update. So what we're trying to do with these webinars is break them up into smaller chunks. So if you come back to listen to them, or you're going to jump on later on to listen to them, we can break them into individual bits. So you can, you go, no, I already know what Marek's been talking about irrigation was. I'm keen to look at the northwest or the northeast. And so every time I come to that slide, I'm going to have a bit of a pause, just so the production team next door can work their magic, and we can split it up into chunks that can be digested at your leisure later on. So we'll start with the northwest, and up around that circular head region on those sandier soils, we're wet. Okay, so we can see here we've got that plateau. We've gone into a typical winter pattern that we didn't get to last season. And you can see here, we filled it up and we're plateauing, and so that's that in this sandier soil. We can see that that water table's been filled and is increasing. So that's, and as you can see, we're sitting wet, whereas the previous seasons that would have been taken off. So this rainfall that we've had up the northwest coast has just been things ticking along. As we go down a bit further southeast, we're in a heavier soil, but a well-structured soil. And we can see here that, yes, we've hit our winter field point, but we are just jumping around similar to where we were last year. So moisture's been utilised. We're not at that plateau as we saw in a wet winter 2 years ago. As we go further down the coast, we can see that's more pronounced. So yes, we hit our full point, but it's the pattern and the period that's really important compared to a wet winter where we can see that distinct plateau. We've never had that. So I look at that and go, how are we tracking this year compared to last year? What are the things that worked last year? So, and as we then go across to, as we go across to Sassafras, so further down that Moriarty region, we can see that, again, that similar pattern. We're at a similar point rainfall-wise, very similar to last year. So all those things that we did last year is something that could come into effect this year. So that summary for the northwest coast, it's wet, but in the sandier soils and circular head, they're waterlogged. So again, understanding your soils and how they behave is really important. So your sandier soils, which have a low water holding capacity, so there's less water available to them, but they freely drain. So they've filled that subsoil up and they're coming up to the surface. So they're sitting in the waterlogged state. Where in your well-structured soil through the state, they're wet, and we're seeing that around the place, but they're not waterlogged. So when rain starts to slow down and our ETO is greater than our rainfall, soil moisture should be used up fairly quickly by your pasture. But one key thing to think about at this time of year is poking damage. All right. So yes, it's wet. Pasture's growing, and pasture's been growing really well since August. So there's no reason to. And yes, we've had a couple of weeks of cooler weather and wet weather, which has slowed things down. But while it might slow things down, it's not such a bad thing because that's going to extend our summer period out. So hopefully we don't get cut short similar to where we were last year. So, but that pegging damage is something we do need to think about. So can you strategically graze your paddocks? Can you leave those wet paddocks for a bit longer until we can let it dry out a bit? So if you got other paddocks, you can shift cattle to in that part of that rotation. Yes, probably not thinking about irrigation now, but keep an eye on it, okay? So especially your autumn sown crops, look at that top 30 centimeters. Have a dig if you can see the soils jump, that the length of your shovel head, or if you've got probes, having a look at that significant diagonal stepping out at 30 centimeters. That's what's going to be our key indication to start irrigating. So use that. Make sure you keep an eye on that because that can come up on you very quickly. The longer we go into the season, the greater our ETO because our day length increases, our temperature increases. And our leaf area increases. So when they go, they'll go quicker. Spring sown crops, at the moment, that's limited by other factors. Irrigation is not a consideration when it comes into it. So planting date is probably one of the biggest things, and trafficability. So no irrigation yet. That's all crop factor related. So we swing across to northeast, and so Ringarooma, following very similar patterns. So that rainfall that we've got recently is just keep things ticking it topped up for now. I've had a request to have a look around that Pipers River area. So I've included Greenside, which is in that region, and that's showing similar patterns as well. And same with Oakbank up near Pipers River, that's showing those similar patterns. So those rainfalls that we've had over the last few days, we've just kept things ticking along. So we can see a couple of years ago, this is our downward trend was starting, but we've these weeks here are critical in terms of giving us an indication about how long summer's going to hold on for. And then if we go across further, that northeast region, so some of those sandier soils, we can see that some of those regions actually didn't quite hit full point. So we're coming off a lower base there already, and we were tracking similar to last year, but and those rains that we got now, they fell similar time last year, but they were much more effective in terms of filling our subsoil moisture. So sitting at that point there, and also West Wyamby. So West Wyamby is seeing that similar area. So those sandy soils are really important. And one thing I did want to touch on with those sandy soils is, especially through the coast, if you have those sandy soils through that Tomahawk area, so down through those sandy soils on the back roads down through Ringarooma, understanding whether or not you have coffee rock within your system. Sorry, whether you have coffee rock within your system. So coffee rock is and this is one of Jason Lynch's pits from a workshop he did a couple of years ago, not far from the coast. Understanding whether you have coffee rock has a big impact on your soil water availability. So coffee rock is so very these soils are quite if they're very free draining. So not only does water freely drain, but also organic matter gets leached through. So coffee rock is a leaching of that organic matter, which is compressed and formed a hard layer over time. So you might think that you have a free draining soil and deep free draining soil, and the roots can get down there. But if you have that coffee rock, which can sit around that 50, 60 centimeters, you then actually do have quite a limited amount of soil moisture availability. And I've spent time there when I was putting the farming forecast probes in, trying to get my head around what was actually going on, especially later on in the season where things start to dry off, and it was the drier banks or the higher parts in the landscape were drying off a lot quicker than the low-lying parts, and I was trying to get were staying a lot wet longer than and green longer than the low-lying parts, which is inverse to what we usually think of. And going around drilling holes, it was fairly obvious after a while that it was where that coffee rock was located. So that's one for the guys in that sandy northeast source to be aware of. So a summary for that northeast, the Scottsdale Pipers River area, those well-structured soils, again, like the northwest coast, they're wet, but they're not waterlogged. So similar to those guys on the northwest coast, yes, we're probably not quite thinking about starting irrigating, but use those indicators, go for a dig and have a look at that moisture probe data to see when that moisture's been used up. That northeast regions, those sandy soils that haven't hit full point, so they have limited soil moisture. So start thinking about irrigating now. We should be well into irrigating if you've got any irrigated ground on those sandy soils to keep your pastures going and maintain soil in optimal condition to maintain plant available moisture. So now we go south to the northern Midlands. If we look at Parkham, we can see here the rain that we've got over the last few weeks. So the last 2 years, we can see that's that trend, that gradient of uptake, which had occurred that middle of September. These rainfalls have just been holding us above that period for the last couple of weeks. So again, this is hopefully going to give us a few more weeks at the back end. Whereas last year we had a quicker finish to summer, but what happens now can dictate that. And also we can see that green line from 2 years ago, that being wetter for longer impacted when that growth in August. So that growth in August then meant that this kicked off a lot sooner. So this period here has a big impact on how summer plays out, and we're getting better at understanding that as we collect more data. And Hagley, again, things are starting to take off a little bit more on those red ferret soils through that region. Bishopsburn, so this one here is a bit more of a heavier soil. So these heavier soils, they will capture that rainfall and hold a bit longer. We might sit at a period of waterlogging a bit longer as well if those things not take off, but we're sitting at a similar point as where we were last year. And if we then go down to on the other side of Longford, we can see that those, as we start to go a bit further south, we're starting to match where we were similar time last year. So a summary for those Northern Midlands paddocks, we're about a 2-week buffer compared to the same time last year due to the last week or so of rain that we've had. Again, similar story. Well-structured soils are wet but aren't waterlogged. So those things I spoke about before, keep an eye on those. Conversations I've had with growers around the region, especially that Longford, Cressy area, paddocks like grass seed and clovers, they are already rapidly utilising those 30 centimetres. So anyone that's around that south of Longford, especially on those midland soils, those loam over clay, so your duplex soils. I'd really recommend going around and having a bit of a dig just to see what your soil's looking like, and have a dig around those freer draining parts of your paddock, so that those mid to slope regions in your paddock, to give you a bit of an idea of the average, or that just slightly drier than average. So we go a bit further down, so the Southern Midlands. If we go down to Lewisham, just south of Campbelltown, on more of those wind-blown, sandier soils, we can see here that we're tracking fairly similar to where we were at the same time last year, but we've gone in with a little less soil moisture. So, but things are rapidly drawing moisture up now. We just haven't had the same rainfall. Those rainfall patterns haven't come as down south as what. So these paddocks haven't quite got that winter refill, so they're tracking similar to the last couple of years. If we go down to the Woodbury region, we can see again they haven't reached that full point. They were tracking similar to last year. We got some September rains last year that propped things up nicely, but we just haven't got that there last year. So it's in quite a dry state at the moment. Stonehouse. So if we swing further to the east coast, and this site's about 20, 25 kilometres as a crow flies from the east coast of Tassie. So they had a little bit more rain coming through that winter period that the east coast got, but again, we're sitting fairly low in terms of available soil moisture. I'm lumping Coal Valley, Midlands, and the Durham Valley into one because there's a bit of a similar trend through there. So look at Daisy Banks, which is just outside of Richmond. Again, we're sitting similar to where we were 2 years ago, which was a difficult season for a lot of people in that part of the state. If we go across to the Durham Valley, Dungrove, which is just north of Bothwell, which is again your windblown, so a windier, sandier soil, so a lighter soil type, where these last few rains that we've had have been fantastic there in terms of that, getting our soil moisture looking a bit nicer. But I'll touch on what I'm seeing here at the moment. But yeah, we can see we were tracking that fairly similar line 2 years ago, but those rains have just kind of propped things up, which is good to see. Weatheron, which is closer to Bothwell, which is your duplex soils, similar state, similar pattern that we're showing there in those heavier soil types. But again, we're still fair way off our full point in that part of the state. Kaywood, which is just outside of Ooze. We can see here that it's a very, very similar pattern in terms of the impact that rainfall is having on our stored soil moisture. So I'd be interested to see if we get some of those warm weather patterns coming along, particularly from those westerly patterns, if we kind of match up with that, with where we were same time last year. But this period, this gap here has a big impact on that later period and so on. So what I want to pull up in this graph is this area here. So how we can use this traffic light system. So this here is at 10, 20, 30, 40 centimeters. So that's reflective of where these lines are sitting based on historical data. So this point here is the fullest that 10 centimeters of soil has ever been, and this is the dry. So this is an indication of planned available water. So we can see here the recent rainfall we've had has filled up that top 40 centimeters, and that's what's available to us. And that's really important to understand that, yes, you might be digging a hole in your paddock and you're going, things are looking fantastic. But the really important part is this point down here. Yes, the top 40 centimeters looks great, but we just don't have the same stored subsoil. You don't have the capacity of stored subsoil moisture that we would in, say, last year. And so if this is how your soil is behaving in terms of its stored moisture, this indicates, yes, things are growing now, but your summer's going to come, your drive's going to come a lot longer because you don't have the buffer there in the subsoil moisture. Whereas if we go across to a site at St. Peter's Pass, which is just off the Midlands Highway, we can see here that we have how our soil moisture distribution is behaving in this part of the state. And this is where that Kaywood profile, it fills from the top down, whereas this soil, it cracks. Okay, so you can see here we got rainfall here through that May, June period, and it completely bypassed the majority of the soil down to that 60, 70 centimetres. So winter rainfall in Kaywood, which was stored in this part of the profile, has gone down into this part of the profile. And then any subsequent rain that we've had, that's especially if it's slow rain, has given us a bit of soil moisture, but it hasn't given us too much in terms of that planned available moisture now. And any moisture that we're going, that will be available to us later on because it's stored subsoil moisture, it may not be able to be accessed by the plant due to how plants root architecture and how it goes into profile based on penetration resistance. So I'll come back to that in our summary, but the other thing I wanted to point out, and this is a few key points for the guys in these parts of the state, is understanding what your rainfall is worth to you. So I just want to pull these two in particular. So this rainfall either side of the start of June in that Dungrove site just north of Bothwell. This is a zoom in of those two rainfall events. So we're talking about 20 mil, very similar amount, but this rainfall here fell within 1 to 2 days. Where as you can see here, this rainfall, the same amount was spread out over those 3 or 4 days. So if we go back to that graph and have a look, we can see that that first one had very little impact in terms of wetting up our soil profile. So understanding what's our rainfall worth to you. Next time we get those, when in a dry period, or any period, if you have a rain, especially a big rainfall event, go out and have a look. Are you getting subsurface runoff? What's actually happening? Where's that water going? But the data gives us a really indication of that, those slow, steady rains, what impact they can have when it comes to infiltration. So that large rainfall event there, that was quite a high application. So it got to a rate of 6.5 mils per hour. How that really didn't infiltrate into that profile. But when we can see this rainfall here, it started to, and it wasn't until that we started to get to that second, third day that we really started to get good penetration into the profile. So yeah, really important to understand what that rainfall is worth to you. Other thing I just want to touch on, I did a bit of a talk down at Bothwell a couple of weeks ago. It was hosted by TAS farmers. I just want to, this is I guess a bit of a put it back onto you guys to go. We've got a great repository of data in terms of weather stations, the AgLogic weather station network, but also the farmer forecaster sites. And while we're displaying what we're displaying, if there's also that if we can display this data in a way that gives you a greater indication about how the season's tracking, I'd love to hear from you. Feel free to put a comment on this webinar, and we can follow up, or give me a call or send me an email. But this is just one of the things I want to do, that because with data, numbers can tell us one thing, but they can quite often be a bit misleading. So I look at this and go, well, one way we can display data is rainfall to date. And if we look here, we go, well, the 1st of January, it's the start of the year, so let's start capturing rainfall data. So this is at the Bothwell weather station, and we can see here, okay, we're sitting about a bit above where we were 2 years ago, which we know was a pretty ordinary year for that part of the state. But when I look at that and go, but realistically, let's think about, rather than using a date, let's have a look at our systems, and go, okay, so rainfall in January, February, that's been utilised by that crop that was last year's crop. So realistically, that rainfall is not worth anything to us now in terms of winter refill and available moisture coming out of winter. So let's just change this a little bit and say anything that falls after the 1st of March is available to us, or is going to have an impact to us now. So if we do that, we just change the numbers slightly based on important key dates within our cropping systems. Then it kind of shows where we are sitting. We're sitting that similar period 2 years ago. I did a webinar last night for some probes that we have through the Murray, so through the just southern New South Wales. And one of the things they come up with, which they really use, is their 12-month rolling average for rainfall. So again, that's one that we can set up for them and put their rainfall graphs as a 12-month rolling average, and they use that for their key drivers. So any key drivers that you use to inform your decision making, that help you make decisions, I want to know, because for me, data's great, but data's only data for the sake of it, unless you're displaying it in a way that can help you make decisions. So yeah, I just thought I'd put that one out there. So if anyone's got any ideas, yeah, more than happy to hear. Cool. So irrigation this season in these regions, in those regions which have not hit full point and are really dry, the key factors we want to look at is, again, if you're autumn sown or spring sown crop, and your capacity to irrigate. So do you have limited water, or do you have a lot of available water? If you have limited water, spread out, and you've got a crop that's, say, a cereal crop, spread out your irrigation to match your sink source relationship, or and this one that should have added, or are you actually going to be able to carry your cereal through? If that case, you have to cut for silage. So this is one where it's really important to talk to your agronomist and make a plan early. If you go, yes, I have enough water to carry my crop through, try and match your sink source relationship. Don't plonk it all on at once. So then you're getting a high number of years, but you don't have the water to carry it through. So try and match that. But even so, if you don't think you can make it, then have a chat to your agronomist about thinking about silage. If you have adequate water, trying to irrigate, especially in a spring sown crop or the autumn crop that's drawn up a lot of moisture, trying to irrigate the soil, not the plant. So what I mean by that is don't necessarily match crop demand now because we look and go, well, it doesn't need to use too much. Get that water into your profile and try and wet it up so then any subsequent rains or any further irrigations get captured by your soils, where you don't dry our soils out to the point where the water just runs straight through, or where our soil gets to a point where it forms a crust and it just runs off the surface. So let's make sure we're irrigating now to increase the efficiency of irrigation or rainfall that you need to do in your driest and your hottest parts of the season, because infiltration is your greatest limiting factor in a dry season. And if we can do anything we can, so irrigating during a rain, irrigating after a rain, to decrease poor infiltration, that's really key to maximising your water use efficiency. So a summary for that part of that Southern Midlands, Derwent Valley and Coal Valley is, the summary is with limited stored soil moisture from winter refill. Okay, this is where it's really important to know your soils and try and figure out where your water is stored. So do they fill from the top down or they fill from the bottom up? So worthwhile going out there with your shovel, having a bit of a dig to see if your soils crack. If they crack, then they're probably going to follow that data that we saw from St. Peter's Pass. And don't just dig your top, especially in a duplex soil, don't just dig your top sandy loam and have a look there. Get down to your bead horizon. All right, get down to your heavier clay and see if you've got crack formation there. And they don't need to be big cracks. We're not talking about a black cracking clay that you could, they have cracks the size, that you could drop your ute down there, but just cracks that you could put your finger down. They'll be going down to that 70, 80 centimetres. And if water gets there, they're straight past the root zone. So that's what I mean by understanding what your rainfall is worth to you. If they're top down, pasture growth will be driven by the recent rainfall that we've had, but it will be exhausted quickly. So our sun will finish early because we won't have the subsoil moisture to help us follow that through. So start asking questions about, should you prioritise your phytoconservation? All right, should you make the most of the growth now? Should you look at locking up paddocks? Because looking at that data, there's a fair chance that we're going to have a period of, this is our feed wedge now, but I'm looking at where it's going to come on us fairly quickly in terms of we're not going to have that much feed available to us in the next month or so. If your soils fill from the bottom up, really monitor your pasture growth closely. Okay, yes, you might be getting a little bit of growth, and yes, that moisture might be down the profile, but I really do wonder whether that pasture will be able to access that moisture, and whether that moisture is just not going to be available to pasture because your root architecture doesn't have the capacity to access that moisture because that mid-level part of the soil is just too dry, or your roots get confined to cracks and they don't have the ability to explore the soil matrix. So that's one to really closely monitor that and not to put too much weight in terms of how long that pasture is going to grow on. But again, this is another one to talk to your advisor, talk to your agronomist, and do some paddock walks. So if we go across to the east coast and the Fingal Valley, we can see here around that Swansea area, things are away. We've had some really nice rainfall in June that started filling up the profile. But yeah, things are tracking similar to 2 years ago in that region there. And if we go a bit further down towards that Buckland area, they're showing similar to that Stonehouse, where we haven't quite hit the refill point in those parts of the east coast. If you go along to the Fingal Valley, we can see there we haven't hit that full point there. We're tracking similar to last year, a couple of years ago. So yeah, tracking very similar to where we were there. So and Speyside, which is a bit further towards middle of Tassie, we can see, yeah, we're sitting above in between last year and the year before. So And also I'll chuck this one in. This is one of our paddocks on the East Coast. This is a carrot seed crop. And already you can see this is an autumn sown crop, how it's already taking off. And so that was that. I've used this as an example as that diurnal stepping, but this is real-time data. We can see that carrot seed crop's already drawing moisture down at quite rapidly down at about 60 centimeters. So making sure we're not letting our if you have available water, making sure we're not letting our crops go into deficit too early, because that's when all kinds of problems like infiltration start to occur. So the East Coast and Fingal summary: the East Coast, parts of the East Coast reached winter refill. Some didn't, but even in those areas that reached winter refill, pasture uptake is ahead of the same time last year. So things have really taken off. So our summer season's kind of shunted. So look at what worked last year. So Fingal Valley, we've got limited subsoil moisture. So I'm looking at those. So the East Coast will finish, might if we don't get subsequent rains, they could potentially finish earlier than most seasons. Whereas your Fingal Valley, you've not only do you have that uptake started, pasture uptake started early, but we just don't have the buffer there as well. So I know phytoconservation isn't a big thing on the East Coast. They just roll with the seasons through there because they're used to the dry. But for those guys further in the Fingal Valley, start thinking about phytoconservation, those kind of things. And if we look at these things early about, planting some options for phyto planting them, spring, those spring sowed phyto crops. So there are also things to think about. But if you've got irrigating pastures, you should be well into it. Okay, and if you have adequate water and available water, we could look at trying to fill up that top part of the profile, just so we can again irrigate the soil, not the plant. Right? Yes, you might be irrigating more than the plant needs, but it's not going to go to waste. It's going to help you capture that subsequent rainfall and irrigations. So we'll swing across to the islands, and we'll start with Flinders. So Happy Valley, which is just below Mount Strzelecki on those sandier soils. We can see we're tracking very, very similar to where we were same time last year. So this again is one where we look at last year. Look what happened last year. We didn't have a wet winter. It was tracking very similar to last year there. And we've got the rainfall pretty much just replicated what happened last year. So let's look at that on those lighter soil types on Flinders, pull some of those levers or think about some of those things that worked last year. Dingira, which is northern part of the island, so it's a heavier soil type. We can see that there was more rainfall, and being that heavier soil type, it's captured that water a bit more. So we're kind of sitting a bit above where we were those 2 years ago. Last year or 2 years ago, and same with Nampara, which is that northern part of the state. So if we then look at King Island, Egg Lagoon, so that's semi-coastal country. Those rain that we've had, nice low rainfall at space it out. So we're tracking pretty similar to last year, but we've given ourselves a bit of a buffer there, which is great to see. And then Pagara, which is on your Pagara loam, we can see very similar tail there. In terms of us giving that extra week. So hopefully that, if we keep getting this rainfall, which fingers crossed we do, but if we then follow that similar rainfall pattern as we did last year, we've at least got that couple of extra weeks of buffer to hopefully push out that summer. So a summary for the islands. It's following a similar pattern to last year, but we've got that, like I said, that 1 to 2 weeks buffer. The rainfall that fell over the last couple of weeks, more pronounced in the heavier soil types. Okay, so that's going to hold on for a bit longer. It's more pronounced in southern parts of King Island, where more rainfall fell. We've got those heavier soils, and more pronounced in the northern Flinders, so the inverse of King Island. So where again we've got those heavier soil types, and there's a bit more rain through that part of the island. So for those guys on those lighter soil types, what worked last year? They're the kind of things we need to think about. And I know people on King Island have already started doing a bit of phytoconservation and planting some phyto crops as well, which has been great to see. So they're the kind of things that we can look at that data. As we understand it more, we can try and bring this to you earlier on in the season, so you can get a bit more, pull those levers a bit earlier, or even start just thinking about it. So that pretty much wraps up what I want to talk about in this webinar. But the key takeaways are, this is the perfect time to get your paddock better. I know we don't want to go out there when it's raining. We see, but when you get those wet parts of your paddock that really turn us off wanting to do anything out there, take your shovel and go digging your wet parts, go digging your dry parts, get an understanding about your variability. Okay, so this is the perfect time to understand what's going on in your paddock and try and match it then to what we spoke about today. Another big one, and we want to, in terms of how we try and get this information out there, there's the key people are yourselves, farmers on the ground who you need to utilise your data, but also the agronomists. So, you know, I encourage your agronomists to jump on and have a listen, or send them the link to have a bit of a listen. But if they're not up to speed with that, it's up to you to ask them the right questions. So if there's anything from today that gets you thinking a little bit differently, or thinking about a particular question or something that you haven't thought about before, take that to your agronomist or your advisor. And so hopefully we can use these webinars to look at seasonal trends and use them, because it's very difficult for me to give specific advice. I can give you a bit of an idea of what's happening trend-wise and what happened based off previous information, but how you use that information is really specific to your business and your systems. So that's where your agronomist really comes into it. So I think your responsibility there is to be curious and ask the right questions so the right conversations happen. So if the right conversations happen, there's enough thought put into it to match your specific enterprises, and so you can pull the right levers at the right time. So yeah, like I said, this is a pilot. How we fit within this agricultural landscape on decision making, I'm still working with, and we'll be talking about this in terms of how we structure this to best fit your needs. But yeah, so again, really keen to hear from anyone if they have any ideas around that. This one here, this is way out of my space, but in terms of more resources based on the data that we're looking at, Chelsea, who's one of the team here at AgLogic, she's got a way better voice than I do, and way more equipped when it comes to stuff like YouTube. And she started making some fantastic online resources. So some little short how-to videos on how to read the data, how to use the app, all these kind of things to make it more readily accessible to you and to understand. So please, what do they say? Like and subscribe, or go and have a bit of a look if you've got any questions. And if you've got any requests, again, let us know. We can make a video. Chelsea's got pretty good and quick at this, and so we can make some videos to answer your needs. And we want to make sure that we're producing stuff that fill in those knowledge gaps. So more than welcome to hear from you. And the one that I always chuck in there is the Weather Station and Probe Network one that if you want to jump onto, have a look and subscribe to, this can get you access to this kind of data, and we'll be adding more and more data as we go on. So thank you very much for jumping on and listening, and for those who will listen to you later, great to know that you're listening. So yeah, feedback's always welcome. I want to really make these valuable and useful to you. So yeah, until next month, keep an eye out for your registration, the link to register for your next one, and yeah, look forward to seeing you then. Thank you very much.